The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is... Please note, the new number is...
Ayo Josh, let me get a little bit of reverb. Yeah. J Will. Yeah, I'm about that lifestyle. I talk green work, repping it all over. It's right on the t-shirt. Fan for a lifetime. Yeah, that's a long pass. Figure I would show some love right on the podcast. Turn this up loud and make sure you don't do nothing else. Cause if you're listening to us, then you're improving your health. My name is J Will. Welcome to the show, yeah. Wrestle, flow, yeah.
Welcome everyone to this very special edition of Wrestling Reverb. This is the debut edition of Mania to Mania, a new look series here on Wrestling Reverb that will be happening just every now and again, just to kind of shake things up a little bit in the world of Wrestling Reverb and in the world of your Fridays. And unfortunately this week, of all weeks, Kevin had a late-minute addition to work. He got called in. He couldn't do anything about it. He feels very apologetic that he's not here for the debut. But if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the picture down in the corner. You know who was here. But it's been a minute since this lovely lad has been on the show. And I honestly, if I'm going to debut a new series and I can't have Kevin, I'm glad it's JPQ that's filling in for him. JPQ, how are you doing this fine day? And again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, brother. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be on the inaugural show of Mania to Mania. Let's jump into it, man. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be a good little time. So for anyone that hasn't, been up to date with my social media, I'll give you a little rundown of what Mania to Mania is, and it's a very simple concept. It isn't too confusing. I don't like to confuse people too much, but of any certain time period from one Mania to another, 365 days-ish, we'll run down each kind of milestone and moment of a certain superstar and ultimately decide whether their year was good, bad, indifferent, whatever. And I was kind of running through names of what can I really signify this kind of series and what it may be, and really put the nail in the head here, really tap it in and hey, this is going to be a cool little series. And I couldn't really think of a better person to really do than Ronda Rousey. I mean, Ronda Rousey had probably one of the best years ever, which we'll get into in a minute, but we're going to go from WrestleMania 34 to WrestleMania 35 and ultimately decide what was Rousey's year like, and all the milestones, the matches, our opinions, our feelings, everything like that. JPQ has kind of been rundown of what I kind of want out of this series, but it's pretty straightforward, everybody. I want to keep this as easy and as lovely for you to listen to as possible. So, before we go into WrestleMania 34, of course, Ronda Rousey come into the WWE just a couple of months before at the Royal Rumble. Now, JPQ, the Royal Rumble when it happened, the first ever Women's Royal Rumble, at the very end, Ronda Rousey comes out and kind of stakes her claim, and it's like, yo, I'm here. What was your initial reaction to Ronda Rousey coming out at the Rumble? Because there was, of course, rumors, we didn't really know what, but when you heard that music, when you seen her come out, what was your initial kind of feeling?
I think you got to be excited. I know I was. I know that the pop that she received was one, that was unparalleled in wrestling at the time. I mean, you're talking an absolute megastar coming in to WWE and showing off her talents. Former UFC champion, first main event sellout, women's, mixed martial artist, what's there not? She's a former Olympian. There's so many accolades that she brings to the party, and now she's entering the sports entertainment world. As a wrestling fan in general, how can you not be excited about that?
Yeah, I'm the same. It was kind of we just got through with the Women's Royal Rumble. I was on a high from that, just in just the magical night it was, the magical match that it was, just the feeling that I was having there. And then you heard that music, and then I'm like, oh shit, that's Ronda Rousey. It's, big business is picking up, pointed at the WrestleMania sign, and this is where Mania to Mania begins. At WrestleMania 34, April 8th, 2018, Ronda Rousey and Kurt Angle versus Stephanie McMahon and Triple H in a mixed tag team championship match. That's not it at all. A mixed tag team match at WrestleMania, and going into this match, no one really knew what to expect. We knew Ronda was obviously a natural athlete, but we really didn't know if she could do this. We didn't know what to expect from the match in general. A mixed tag team match can be a little limited. You look at all the people involved in this and you're like, this has all the keys to success. The match itself, did you expect it to be as good as it was, JPQ?
Kinda. So what I liked about the match when we first saw it was the first introduction to what Ronda Rousey could be, right? Yeah. Like what's Ronda Rousey 1.0, right? And she kind of evolved over time. But this really kind of gave us a baseline to begin to gauge how her wrestling acumen was versus how we knew her in the UFC. So that alone is exciting. But then you put her with Kurt Angle. You have them going up against Stephanie McMahon and Triple H, two people that have been in the business for as long as they have. Those three together can make anybody look like a star. It was good booking. Can I say that? It was good booking by WWE to put these four together. And Ronda Rousey got in some great offense. And more importantly, we got the spot, one of the WrestleMania moments in WrestleMania 34, when she got her hands on Triple H. So there's a lot of good things that happened here. It was a good, welcome to WWE showcase for Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. It was just, I kind of was like, I knew we had something. Going into this match, there was a lot of build-up. I mean, she attacked Triple H, put him through a table at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, and we had lots of interactions with her and Stephanie, and, this was all kind of building since WrestleMania 31. It was really years in the making, adding Kurt Angle and everything that was going on between Stephanie, Triple H, and Angle, and just everything. It just had, again, the keys to success, and I'm kind of the same as you. I was kind of like, this is going to be good. I just didn't think it was going to be as good as it was. It was one of the best matches of the night. It was one of the better matches, in my opinion, of last year. So, this really started this, Rousey being so natural in a WWE ring. I understand she had some training, but she hadn't been wrestling, for 10 years like some of the people in the company. And she just naturally took to the ring, which is, obviously, she's a natural athlete being in the Olympics and in the UFC, and the star power that she just carried. I don't really think that could have went any better than it did. Do you?
No, and I think, again, I think from a booking side, I think it was smart. They knew that she was limited coming in. I mean, how can you not be? Yeah. And they put her in a position to succeed. They didn't ask too much of her in this match. Just enough to get a sampling of what to expect moving forward, that baseline. And I think they accomplished that. And WrestleMania is about moments, man. Yeah. And this was a hell of a moment, and it's one where, what are we now? Year and a half out from that night, and it's still one of the lasting impressions of WrestleMania 34.
It really is. And, there was so much unknown going on with Ronda Rousey at this point, just even before this match, and we'll talk about what happened the next night on Raw in just a second, but even after, you were like, what's the crowd perception going to be? Is she going to be loved? There was a little bit of, I don't know, there was some, obviously, as the internet always is, there was a little bit of negativity towards her, the way she come in at the Rumble, and then we kind of just lent into this match. We're like, but that was kind of just like, at that point, after the match was over, everyone was like, okay, this girl is really good. She has a lot of potential to, be huge here, like she should be. But we go into the April 9th edition of Raw in 2018, the Raw after WrestleMania, and a moment, the Raw after WrestleMania is again built on moments just like WrestleMania. She takes out Stephanie McMahon, puts her in the armbar again, and the crowd is going wild. And at this point, the reason I put this in here is because the crowd perception of Ronda Rousey is something that I'm going to bring up a lot over this 360-day journey, 65-day journey, but she was very over at this stage, and taking out Stephanie McMahon is always kind of, you know, it's kind of, you're always going to get cheered when you take out Steph because she's a great heel and people don't like her. But that moment in particular, do you remember watching that moment, JPQ, and just being like, yeah, Ronda's, you know, just the sky's the limit with Ronda?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it even one step further. I don't mean to take it back, but to go forward. But when she signed her contract at the TLC back before WrestleMania, that, like, if you watch that segment, the crowd is intense. Mm-hmm. Intense for her when she comes out, and they never lost that. She never lost that momentum through the night after WrestleMania. Like, the crowd is rabid for Ronda Rousey coming out of the WrestleMania match, and when she then, I'm not going to say turns on Stephanie McMahon because that's a bad illustration of it, but when she decides that she's not going to play the Authority's game and that she's not going to be manipulated by them, well, hell, you know, you're speaking to the fandoms of everybody who's had to deal with the Authority forever. Yeah, and
feels like,
you know, puts herself, yeah, it really does. But they put herself in a position to be the face, not just a baby face, but the face of the women's division, and they kind of supplanted it that night.
Yeah, and to, you know, everyone that knows you, JPQ, know you are just a lover of women's wrestling as much as I am, and just taking out of the WWE world, and does Ronda Rousey being at WWE, even at this point, even in April of 2018, even at this point, help other women just all over the industry? Does it raise women's stock just in general, or does it really not have that much of a downward effect on the rest of the industry?
I think you have to kind of look at the moments. I think at this moment, there was a tremendous amount of potential. Mm-hmm. More importantly, you know, Ronda Rousey and what she means to women's athletics overall, right? And what she's been able to accomplish, the glass ceilings that she's been able to break throughout her career in any sport, right? For her to be on the grandest stage of them all, WWE, again, only validates the work that the Sasha Banks, the Becky Lynch, the Charlotte Flairs, and everybody else has put in on the independent scene, as well as everybody that came before them, right? Because the evolution was happening. So in that instance, in that context, at this moment in time, the night after WrestleMania 34, yeah, like, you have to feel like you're trending upward and you're trending in the right direction, because WWE is finally putting a spotlight on women's wrestling in a way that they've never done before. Yeah,
I agree. Ronda is just, again, like you said, someone that broke a lot of glass ceilings that you didn't even know that could be broken. To be completely honest, you never thought that this was a possibility with a lot of things that she has done and will continue to do, I'm sure, in some capacity. But going into, after, you know, WrestleMania and the Raw and stuff like that, Ronda was just kind of, for a lack of a better term, she was just kind of there, and we were kind of waiting to see what Ronda was going to do next. On May 14th, 2018, on a NBC Upfront's red carpet, Nia Jax challenged Ronda Rousey to a Raw Women's Championship match at Money in the Bank. Now, I vividly remember seeing this and being, I don't want to say the word angry, but I was just a little bit like, oh, we're going with this already. I knew that Ronda was going to be a Raw Women's Champion at some stage. I just didn't think that we were going to go, you know, her first program straight after WrestleMania was the Raw Women's Championship match. She hadn't even had a singles match yet. Can you recall the reaction to Rousey challenging, we're being told that Rousey was going to challenge Nia Jax for the title? Were you surprised to see it happen so quickly, or were you just like, no, this is where we should probably go next?
No, I was on board. I was on the bandwagon. More importantly, because I didn't know how long at the time she was going to be in WWE. Number two, she's the baddest woman on the planet. So, you know, with the moniker like that, and with her history in mixed martial arts, like, there doesn't need to be a warm up, right? And she's tested and proven, and she's put in her dues. She's just done it in different ways, you know, to build her stature to where it was at the time. Nia Jax, you know, back then, that's a great heel to hate. You know, and with the type of fever pitch that we had with Ronda at the time, my goodness, like heel, face, rock and roll, let's get to Money in the Bank.
Yeah, and, you know, it was a very different way to do that, and I think it was a very smart way to actually do it, because you had the star power of Ronda Rousey representing WWE, probably, you know, at the very early stage. This is probably for her first, like, red carpet event for WWE, and at an upfronts thing for NBC Universal and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a very different way to do it. But we go into May 21st, 2018, and Nia Jax and Ronda Rousey are signing the contract for their Money in the Bank match. Now, of course, Stephanie McMahon is involved in this, and to run down what kind of happened is Stephanie was kind of stirring the pot, you know, saying things that, you know, Nia's in a different weight class, and she's bigger and stronger and better, and Ronda's going to take Nia's arm and break it, and there was obviously tension. I think this did a good job at just being another match. It made, I think, in my mind, if anything, going into Money in the Bank and this contract signing and everything like that there, Nia Jax, she beat Alexa Bliss at WrestleMania 34. She was the Raw Women's Champion, but I don't know. She didn't really have a lot of momentum, I don't think. So I think working with someone like Ronda Rousey, like you said, that it's just a perfect kind of mesh of someone to love, someone to hate, and doing things like this had opportunities for Nia to talk. It had opportunities to see Rousey talk, because we really hadn't seen that too much. And you add in Stephanie McMahon, you've got kind of a recipe for success. And throughout the weeks leading into Money in the Bank, there was a lot of back and forth between Nia and Ronda, a lot of arm bars being attempted, and I think people were on board at this stage, well, at least I was, and obviously you were. What do you think this does for someone like Nia Jax, who, like I said, I don't know if she necessarily had a lot of momentum coming off of defeating Alexa Bliss at WrestleMania 34?
You know, it's funny is that I still remember a tweet that I put out during WrestleMania 34, and it was the montage clip right before the Raw Women's Championship match, with a lot of the bullying that we saw between Nia and Alexa. And I sat there and I remember tweeting, like, you know, 4 years from now, if you go back and watch WrestleMania 34, you're going to think the build for this match was a hell of a lot better than what it was. So in that context, you know, they had a heavy investment in Nia. Coming out of 34 with the whole, you know, be a star, anti-bullying type of stuff, and then she flips, and then she kind of turns this heel character and kind of moves forward from there. First time with the champion, she finally gets over, you know, all this bullying stuff. She's got a chip on her shoulder. She's trying to make a name for herself. She's going to take out the new toy of what she assumed to be the Authority, which ultimately didn't end up being, you know, in Ronda Rousey, and she was going to utilize her to elevate herself. I thought it was a good story to tell. The problem is that, you know, again, I know people out there, some people out there like Nia Jax, especially at the time. She always falls flat. Like, she always falls flat, and whether it's in the ring, you know, or her promos. And so, knowing that, it's crazy to say, but that was so to your segment on Raw that night, where Stephanie's playing the master manipulator between Nia and Ronda. You have somebody that can't talk in Ronda because she's brand new, and you have somebody who can't connect with the audience with Nia. And so you allow Stephanie McMahon to go out there and kind of build the heat and tension between the two. And I think they accomplished that. So did the build work? Yes. Is it because of the two people that were going to do the match? No. Very interesting circumstances.
That is a really cool way to look at that. That's a really cool way to look at it. Because sometimes I feel, we'll talk about Stephanie McMahon for a minute here. I feel like sometimes people just are like, we hate Stephanie. She's no good. Stephanie McMahon is very good. She's a great talker. She's a McMahon. At the end of the day, she's a McMahon, and say what you will about the McMahons. They obviously have been in this business for a long time. Stephanie McMahon has grown up in this business, and really, she's one of the better talkers in WWE in general. So using Stephanie, like you said, and it's kind of making me like have like a little bit of an aha moment. Like using Stephanie in that role is perfect for someone with a lack of experience and someone that isn't necessarily having a lot of momentum and isn't really connecting with the audience. It's kind of the perfect way to do that. And I didn't really think of it like that, but it is the perfect way to kind of do that. How do you feel about Stephanie McMahon? I know it's easy to hate her, but it's also fun to hate her. But she is very good at what she does, I think.
Yeah, so again, you kind of have to break the two characters apart, right? Like businesswoman Stephanie McMahon, I think that there can be a lot of conflict, based off of being a chief branding officer and the position that she's in to push the women's division, but then all the business dealings that they have as well, and kind of balancing those two. But then on screen, right, provided that I get lethargic with Stephanie when she's a main focus of a storyline for an extended period of time.
I can see that.
Yeah, if she comes in and does 4 or 5 months, I'm fine. It's when, the authority angles go 6, 12 months. The best one's the John Cena, Seth Rollins authority angle back in 2015, 16, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, somewhere like that.
Yeah, it's like that gets a little tiresome over time. But you bring her in for a quick pop, 4 or 5 months. Yeah, I can get behind her because she's very good at what she does. She's very good on the mic. People do not give her enough credit for what she does on the mic. And as long as she's not the sole focus of attention, she's a great background manipulator, and she plays that role very well. Always has.
So, basically, in layman's terms, you like Stephanie McMahon in short bursts.
Yeah, I like her in short bursts, and I like her business acumen, too. It's just, again, that's a whole different,
That's a whole other thing. But,
yeah.
I can definitely get behind what you're saying there. But we fast forward to June 17th, 2018, the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Nia Jax defending the Raw Women's Championship against Ronda Rousey. And before we talk about the finish of the match, the actual match itself is one that I think gets a little bit overlooked for the people involved. Really, at this point, it was probably one of Nia Jax's better matches, and obviously, it was Ronda's second match. Damn, this was good for what you take this as, because it was they just really clicked. And one thing I can say about Ronda Rousey's in-ring skill, obviously being her background, this girl isn't afraid to take a little bit of a bump. She likes to take a little bit of a beating when it's necessary to do so, but these two just meshed really, really, really well. What do you think about the match before we talk about the finish?
Interestingly enough, I agree with this is one of Ronda's better performances. And the reason is because they didn't have her do too much. A, she certainly didn't have to lead. No. But two, they didn't put Nia in a position to where she needed to lead either, right? It was power versus judo. Mm-hmm. And judo is all about utilizing the other person's weight to your advantage to get momentum to throw them, right? So that marries very well. We saw good power spots from Nia in this, which again then speaks to Ronda and being able to take those spots. We saw sit-out power bombs. We saw bear hugs early in the match. We saw different, I would call them splashes, but they're not really splashes because Nia doesn't have hops.
She does,
but her running ring to ring and hitting in the turnbuckles. But so in that instance, they told a good story by showing that Ronda wasn't invincible, but they allowed her to come back a little bit, and I think that was good storytelling. That would have been it should have been a nice way to start her career, and I think they did a good job telling that story in this match.
Yeah, and that's a really, really cool way to. I love the way you break down wrestling, because you see wrestling. I don't really know anyone else that sees wrestling the same way as you, in the sense of you break down a match without overanalyzing it, but still analyzing it to a point where you go, I see why they're doing it this way. And it makes me look at wrestling a little bit different, because I just see it as like a fun match, and it was a good match. But you break it down of like, this is judo. You're seeing the other side of Ronda Rousey. And in a sense, in this match, you talk about the invincibility, and people weren't really sure what to really expect from Ronda with wrestling. Was she going to be presented more of just this ass kicker that is kind of like a Brock Lesnar? Was she going to be presented in? We didn't really know. It was just this whole level of unknown. I think this humanizes Ronda Rousey a little bit in going, okay, and it helps Nia Jax still look like a monster, because that's what Nia Jax really excels in, is when she's throwing people around. That's really when Nia works best. And this was a perfect balance of the two. Now, I didn't really know going into this, how would you have, I don't think Ronda Rousey should have been losing, and I don't think, it would have hurt someone to lose here, but they did something smart earlier in the night. Alexa Bliss won the Money in the Bank ladder match, and she cashed in this match, become the Raw Women's Champion again. What do you think about the finish of this match? I thought it was a cool moment. It was the, quickest women's Money in the Bank cash-in ever, of course, because there had only been a couple. But using Bliss here in this role, do you think it was kind of, again, a perfect recipe just with the dynamics between Rousey and Bliss? What do you think about the moment and Bliss becoming Raw Women's Champion once again?
I like it. I did. I like this. I like this for a couple different reasons. Number one, I like Cash-In's night of.
Yeah.
Number one, don't waste the time. I don't need that storyline drawn out every time. Sometimes it's good, and I don't need it every time. So for her to cash in this, because it's not that people didn't see it coming, right? But what it was is Ronda's ultimately going to be champ.
Yeah.
You could have had her come in and beat Nia right off the bat and her be champ, and everybody would be happy. But there is something to be said for, in the wrestling world of leave the crowd wanting more, right? Mm-hmm. And if you go back and you remember, what we talked about before, and Ronda Rousey being so goddamn over with the crowd and how hot the crowd was for her, you don't want her to win the title the first time she goes in her second match ever, right? You want her, you want it as a fan, but you don't want it. Yep. Right, and you can build towards that, and you can make money as you print to that, right? It's like the old school way of building a star, and in this instance, you have this cheeky way of doing it by having Alexa Bliss win, come down, get the DQ, Ronda gets the win, and then she goes on to pin Nia after her arm's been worked over 800 different times by Ronda Rousey, and now we got a new champion, we have a pissed off Ronda, and we've got something to build towards SummerSlam. Again, you line it up and you look at it and you say, they were doing this right at the beginning. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were executing it on all levels of this story. Good on WWE in regards to that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what we've all been guilty of at some stage, there's a line between what wrestling fans want and what wrestling fans need. And I think sure, we probably wanted Ronda at the time. I can remember being like, okay, Ronda with the title is the perfect way to go here. But what we need is a nice, simple heel and face. The typical heel that is kind of the, runaway champion. Is not really going to defend her title if she doesn't need to. And we've got we just want to see Ronda kill Bliss at this stage. And I think that was it was a great moment. The crowd were going nuts. Bliss was in a certain level of, she had a certain level of connection with the fans, albeit whether it was heel or face. She was very much popular. Take that for what you will, but she always had that. She still does. So her having the cash in and kind of moving away from Nia and Rousey to going into Rousey and Bliss, I think we had, we had something here, because on the next night on Raw, it was the June 18th edition of Raw in 2018. Ronda Rousey attacks Alexa Bliss. I believe she might have attacked Kurt Angle at some stage in this, maybe inadvertently, or she did it out of anger, and she gets suspended nonetheless. So 30 days, you're gone from the company for a suspension for attacking referees and security guards and Angle and Bliss and everything. Just, she was pissed off. And it was a side of Rousey that we were waiting to see, and we're like, okay, cool. And also, it kind of kept Rousey away from television at this stage, just to kind of breathe, and we can see where we go as we kind of move along. But that segment in particular, I believe it might have kicked off that night of Raw. I could be wrong, but I remember just being really much like, oh shit, this is going to be, I just want to see Rousey tear Bliss apart. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I think they did the right thing by putting her with a talker, right? Say what you will about Alexa Bliss, you know, the blonde narrative that's pushed with WWE.
Yes.
You know, her wrestling acumen in ring, her work rate isn't the greatest. Her finisher's a little goofy. You can spend all day knocking, you know, why they push Alexa Bliss and find the justifications for it along the way. You know, but at the end of the day, she's pretty good on the mic, right?
Yeah.
She's always been able to handle the crowd. She's proven that she can handle what chants, and she commands the microphone when she's in the middle of that ring. And for somebody like Ronda Rousey, you know, one, you're dealing with somebody who is a multi-time champion. So what does that mean with regards to WWE and Alexa Bliss? It doesn't have to mean anything, right? Like, there's prestige behind it, whether you want to believe it or not, because she's 5'1", you know, 110 pounds. But either way, like, she's a multi-time champion, so there's a bit of prestige there. And on top of that, she can talk, and she holds herself in a manner that's bigger than herself. So you put Ronda Rousey with her, you let Alexa do all the talking, you let Ronda just kind of stare her down. This creates good interaction between the two, and this is how you begin to build, knowing that Ronda Rousey isn't in a position to where she can go out and wrestle night in and night out to get to a point where, you know, she can be taken, or that she needs to be taken legitimately. We know she's legitimate because of everything that she did in her history of sports entertainment. So in that instance, again, just good, smart booking. And for everybody out there that hated Alexa Bliss, you're hoping that this is going to be the comeuppance that she deserves. You know, let's see how it plays out.
It's a formula that is proven and it works. And I was just glad we had a pretty, you know, big match to look forward to. But in the interim, of course, Rousey was suspended, and we go into Extreme Rules, and it's Nia Jax and Alexa Bliss in an Extreme Rules match. And Ronda Rousey was at ringside. I believe that she bought a ticket to the show or something like that. Mickie James was on the outside. Rousey ends up getting involved in the match. You know, basically in some way, shape, or form, it led to Bliss beating Nia, and we kind of knew where we were going, and it kind of got Nia her rematch, and then Nia was kind of done with the championship. I just remember this match, not for the match itself, but just for Rousey, and again, I'm going to talk about crowd connection. There was no doubting that she had formed a connection with the crowd pretty quickly, but even in this moment, since the suspension and, you know, where we were kind of going in an Extreme Rules environment, her beating up Mickie James in that instance, I just remember the crowd being like, "We like you, Ronda. We want to see you win the title." Were you still in the same... Obviously, we're wrestling fans, and we can kind of analyze wrestling and go, this is where we're pretty sure we're going. But even in this moment, were you just like, there's money with Ronda, and there's money with Ronda holding the championship, and there's money in this feud? What was your kind of thought process on seeing Ronda coming towards the end of her suspension and where we're going into SummerSlam?
Yes, of course. You know, at this moment, you know, she was one of the hottest properties that they had, you know, and you wanted her, you were invested in her, and you wanted her to be the champion. You wanted her to take it off Alexa Bliss. You wanted her to power through whoever she needed to power through to get there. And they did a good job doing that. Not every segment worked. I liked the 30-day suspension. It was a little bit... It took a little bit to get there, and the promos leading into it weren't the best, with Kurt and Stephanie kind of, you know, behind the scenes kind of pushing, you know, for Kurt to make those types of things. Like, all that, we can sit here and we can break down and we can talk about, you know, whether we enjoyed it or not. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, she went away, she came back, her momentum didn't stop. If anything, the heart grows fonder. Right? Yeah. And she came back ready for SummerSlam against Alexa Bliss, and I was game for it.
Yeah, it got us from point A to point B. That's really all that matters. There was a few, you know, detours along the way, but it got us to where we needed to be. On the July 16th edition of Raw, the night after Extreme Rules, Ronda Rousey technically violated her suspension to attack Mickie James and Alexa Bliss. Again, crowd was behind her, the crowd was ready. On the August 6th edition of 2018, Ronda Rousey made her in-ring Raw debut against Alicia Fox in the main event of Raw. It's pretty cool to say, you know, not everyone gets to say they made their in-ring Raw debut in the main event of Raw. So it's pretty cool to say that she has enough star power to be in there with whoever it may be and kick some ass. The match, I don't really remember much of the match. It was fairly quick from what I remember. Fox probably didn't get in a lot of offense, but, you know, it's Ronda Rousey. You know, people at this stage were, again, connected with Ronda. They were ready to see Ronda and Bliss. When you kind of were like, okay, she's wrestling on Raw, in your mind, did you go, okay, we now that she's wrestled on Raw once, we're going to see her wrestle a lot more often? Or did you think it was better to keep Ronda out of the ring and only have her in the ring when necessary?
In the ring when necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally in the ring when necessary. That oversaturated, again, that WWE, you know, they have their formula, they have their model, but there's something to be said for even like a property like Ronda Rousey in the eyes of WWE. You can't, you gotta limit how much you put her out there. You gotta keep her, because she is so new and she is so green. Like, there's a liability to believability when she's out there. You gotta use her at the right moments. Having her come out against Alicia Fox and not somebody like Sasha Banks at the time is good booking, because you just need a squash. You're just building a story, and that story is that this person's unstoppable. And we got that with Alicia Fox. She then goes away, you know, and she might be there on Raw, but she's certainly not in the ring every week performing. So as a fan, I'm sitting there and I'm associating she's the baddest woman in the planet, and every time she gets in that ring, the people that are in against her are not only getting beat, but they're getting beat decidedly. It's just, it's all working right now.
Yeah. And at the end of that match, of course, Bliss and Ronda Rousey is made official as we head into August 19th, 2018 at SummerSlam. Ronda Rousey versus Alexa Bliss for the Raw Women's Championship. Now, there's not really a lot to break down of this match. It was like 4 or 5 minutes. And Ronda won pretty decisively. Bliss really didn't get in too much offense in this match. It was a lot of, like, you know, stalling and then big moves, and we've got a new Raw Women's Champion. I didn't expect this to go this way going into it, but when I kind of come out of it, I was like, yeah, it probably should have went that way. Did you have any issue with the way the match went? Because I know a lot of people were a little bit iffy on, like, having Bliss kind of just run through by Ronda Rousey, or did you think this was just the necessary step to take?
It was perfect. It was, and again, I still even remember tweeting about it during SummerSlam back in 2018, where I said this is exactly what it needed to be. There is not one side of me, wrestling fan wise, the suspension of disbelief that thinks that Alexa Bliss can get into any type of competitive match against Ronda Rousey in anything that's not a table game. She came in, she stalled, she ran around the ring, she wouldn't allow Ronda to get her hands on her, and as soon as Ronda did, Ronda broke her arm. Yep. And that's all the story was that needed to be told, because Ronda Rousey is that much more dominant than everybody else in the division. And that's the story that they were telling. And they told that story, and it was a squash match on Alexa. Yes, I was thoroughly pleased with how they did that, because there's just no reason why anything else should have happened.
Yeah, and I think a notable thing to say at the end of this match is that the Bella Twins were ringside. They actually celebrated with Ronda at the end of the match, I think along with Natalya. And, you know, we'll talk about the Bellas in a minute. But we'll go into Hell in a Cell on the 16th of September. It was the rematch between Alexa Bliss and Ronda Rousey. And to really just go against what you just said, this was a wrestling match. This wasn't the kind of decisive win that Ronda had. It was more of a competitive match, and I didn't necessarily think it was wonderful from memory. I believe Bliss may have gotten hurt in this match. I think this is where she probably suffered her first concussion from what I know. I think she got it in this match. So, you know, that probably doesn't help going along with the match, but it was the polar opposite of their SummerSlam encounter, and I think this was kind of, in my head, I was going, okay, this is going to be more of the way that Ronda's going to be portrayed from now on as champion, as opposed to being the way that she won the title, which I didn't necessarily have a problem with, but it was very different from their SummerSlam match.
Yeah, this match was, so just to break it down a little bit, first match that they had at SummerSlam was 4.5 minutes. This match was 12 minutes. This, to me, the way I always looked at this match was, is Ronda Rousey Bill Goldberg, or is Ronda Rousey a wrestler? And this is the match where, as a fan, I have to decide, is she somebody that is going to go out there and be competitive, night in and night out, or is she just an attraction, right? Now, whether she shows up or doesn't show up, it's like the Brock mentality, right? Is Brock a wrestler, a professional wrestler, or is he an attraction, right? And you can make all the cases in the world that Brock Lesnar is an attraction. He's not a professional wrestler until he goes out there and he wrestles, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's great, right? This was the seasoning that Ronda Rousey needed. As a fan watching that, it gave me confidence. Now, it wasn't the greatest match in the world, and I didn't need it to be, because my expectations for her in-ring work rate wasn't high, right? Like, it's a different thing. But for her to sit in and go in and do 12 minutes at Hell in a Cell in AT&T Center, San Antonio, was she needed to prove that to me as a fan for me to start to get behind her credibility-wise. And she did that. She came out of this match looking more like a professional wrestler than Bill Goldberg. And because of that, I was on board. What actually happened and transpired during the match was irrelevant to me. Moving forward, I could hang my hat on that. Ronda Rousey was going to be here and try to help elevate the women's division into I use the word equal stature, right, with the men's roster, but really more of just elevating the women's division to be taken more seriously by the fans.
Yeah, and Ronda's a perfect person to do that, because it adds a sense of legitimacy that not necessarily everyone can bring. You can't teach legitimacy. You have to just bring it yourself, from what your history is and whatever it may be. So I think that's the kind of perfect way to kind of say that. But yeah, it was a very different match, and obviously Ronda won, and we were kind of, moving into a very important time. So we go into October 6th, 2018 at the Super Showdown. Rousey had found some friends in the Bella Twins. The Bellas have, they recently returned to WWE for a brief little time to build towards Evolution and everything it may be. So they took on the Riot Squad. They won against the Riot Squad at Super Showdown. And then the couple of days later on Raw, they had a rematch. They beat them again, and the Bellas turned on Ronda Rousey. Now, there was lots of rumors going around at this stage that one of the main events of Evolution was going to be Nikki Bella and Ronda Rousey. And a lot of people were like, ooh, I'm not really sure about that, because as you know, we've had many conversations, JPQ, about the Bellas. They're very polarizing. People hate them, people love them, people feel indifferent on them. You know me, I'm a fan of both of them, especially Nikki. And I don't think they get a lot of the credit they deserve. So I was genuinely quite excited about this. Now, I thought I would have loved to see the turn at Super Showdown, considering I was there. So I would have liked to see it there. But I got to see Ronda Rousey. Again, crowd connection is something. That night on October 6th, Ronda Rousey got one of the bigger pops of the whole night. I was in that stadium, and it was huge. And she had crowd connection that not a lot of people had in that stadium. So witnessing it firsthand, she had a connection with the crowd that not many people could really say. The only people that really got louder pops were from the people from Australia and Triple H and The Undertaker. That's pretty good company.
Yeah.
But the Bellas, going into this, they turned on Ronda Rousey. It was a pretty cool turn. We all kind of seen it coming. Initial thoughts on the turn before we get into the match. How do you view the Bellas? For anyone that hasn't heard you talk about the Bellas, how do you view Nikki and Brie Bella and what they bring?
I like the Bellas. I don't know why people they shit on them as much as they do. Excuse me.
Go ahead, swear all you like.
We and you and I have gone back and forth about the Bellas a whole bunch,
Yep.
right? And it's very easy to sit here and nitpick through and say, well, this person doesn't do this well, and this person doesn't do that well, and booking, and how these people are shoved down our throats. And okay, fine, I'll give you some of that, right? But when they first did their first run, Brie Bella was the worker, Nikki Bella was still being brought up. When they came back for their second run, Nikki Bella was made the star, and Brie Bella took a backseat to her sister. When they were doing their first run, they had Twin Magic that they would run. They would play off the fact that they kind of looked alike in the ring, and that was a nice little element of sports entertainment that goes overlooked. When we go back and we look at the history of the Bellas, they come back as valets. They quickly work their way out of valets. Nikki works herself into a position to where if you go back and watch Nikki's matches, they're not horrible, right? And for that time, she was putting on pretty decent matches left and right, and she was dating John Cena, so she got the push and all this other bullshit.
Gives a fuck at the end of the day.
Yeah,
everyone's dating someone. So
right, we want to justify why she's in the position that she's in when you got AJ Lee sitting there and you got Caitlyn sitting there and you got all these different things going on. Okay, well at the same time, you have Total Divas starting, which, let's be honest, really is the Bella's show.
Yes.
And then you have your marionette of women's wrestlers around them. They were marketable. They printed money for WWE. They knew how to get themselves over. They weren't horrible on the mic.
No.
Brie was a little shoddy in the ring. Like, she really took a step back in the ring.
Especially in a later time. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
So, there's criticisms there, but you look at the totality of their careers. You tell me now, outside of current day women's wrestling, the Four Horsewomen, Shayna Baszler, and WWE specific, even Asuka, right? And we could go down that ramp if we want, because she's not as buried as people think she is.
No.
You tell me who got more investment out of WWE for women's wrestling than Nikki Bella did.
I agree with you completely. You're not gonna have to convince me. Don't worry. I've been on that waving that flag for so long, just because people. Again, you said it best. People are always going to nitpick everything and justify, but literally you could do that with 100% of anything. If you really look at anyone's body of work for anything that they do, you can find things wrong with it. No one is 100% perfect. And Nikki Bella and Brie both were involved in some pretty cool stuff. They were both involved in some pretty cool matches. Do I think they're the greatest women's wrestlers or the greatest wrestlers in the world? No, but who is? It's all subjective anyway. Some person could think that Nikki Bella is the best, and that's their right to think that. It's all opinion-based anyway, but rewinding back to going into Evolution, there was a lot of the build, and this build, again, was picked apart for a lot of shaming of who you were with and who you weren't with, and a lot of stuff with Ronda's mum being brought up, and there wasn't a lot of physicality between the two, because I think they were trying to leave that to Evolution and to it may be. And again, this match was being picked apart because it was the main event, and this is an unpopular thing to say, I guess, but I think it was rightfully the main event. Maybe it hadn't been the best match of the night, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you look at a lot of the main events of Wrestlemanias and a lot of events of SummerSlam or whatever, and it is the Brock Lesnar's, the Roman Reigns, and why the other more wrestling-style matches are a little bit lower on the card. This was the money-drawing match of Evolution, and you needed that, I think. I don't know. How did you feel about this being presented? How did you feel about this build? Before we actually talk about the match, there was a lot of, lack of a better term, slut-shaming and stuff like that from Ronda and Nikki, and a lot of people didn't like that, and a lot of people didn't like the fact that this was probably going to main event over Becky and Charlotte.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm going to go back to Nikki for just a second, because it's going to fit the narrative of what I'm about to say. But one of the biggest accolades that Nikki has that people don't seem to want to give her the credit for is that she was the transitional champion that took that ended the Divas era and started the women's evolution. right? She was the one that carried the brand through that transition as you were getting everybody else up and running, right? She took on the onus of learning how to wrestle better.
Yeah.
To put herself in a position to be viable, a credible enough champion, so that when Becky, Sasha, Charlotte, and eventually Bayley were ready to take the mantle and take the ball and run with it, they had a ball to run with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the story that was being told between Nikki and Ronda, right? Now, could they have done it better? Sure, right? Because the narrative was the Divas versus, what wrestling is today and everything that Ronda Rousey stands for with regards to the progression of women's wrestling within WWE. It's a good story to be told. Now, they didn't. The turn came quick, and then everything that kind of happened after it, then getting the mother involved, it got convoluted. But you kind of expect that with WWE on some level, right? And
especially with the main event story. Oh yeah, we will get there later. Especially with the main event story. The main story of something has always got to have something. WWE is entertainment. It's a television show. It's soap opera. It's drama, whatever. And sometimes you can have two people just wrestling, and it's fine. But WWE have to attract every kind of an audience. And there was a lot of eyes on this match with Nikki, her Total Divas success, Total Bella's success, being the former girlfriend of John Cena. It does add a level of star on you. And Ronda Rousey. Who is Ronda Rousey? There was a lot of casual fans watching this match as opposed to wrestling fans. This was the casual fans match of the night. Yeah,
and then it's a big one. It's the first all-women's WWE pay-per-view. There's a lot riding on this. So, but more importantly, this is when I started kind of doing the rounds on podcasts, right? Here's what I liked so much about Nikki Bella versus Ronda Rousey, and I don't think enough people were talking about it at the time, because favoritism, right? Because we have the people, we have the chosen ones that we want to win the titles. Ronda Rousey is so dominant within her run within WWE, right? The problem with somebody being that dominant, the baddest woman on the planet, the former UFC champion, all these things, is that nobody is believable enough to beat her one-on-one. So why would you take somebody like Becky Lynch, or why would you take somebody like Charlotte and Sasha and Ember Moon when they first called her up, and Asuka and everything that they did with her towards the back end of 2018, and burn them on Ronda Rousey on the biggest stage that the women's platform has had, or the women's division has had, on the biggest platform that WWE has given them, when you know that there is no conceivable way of them winning at the time, right? The best thing about Ronda Rousey is that she elevated the entire division as a whole on both Raw and SmackDown.
I agree.
The worst thing about Ronda Rousey is that she created a glass ceiling for everybody underneath of her, right? So you needed to burn your Ember Moons, you needed to burn your Carmellas, you needed to burn Alexa Bliss and Nia Jax and Alicia Foxes of the world, so that Ronda Rousey could elevate the division as a whole. You can't burn Charlotte. You can't burn Sasha, right? Sasha and Bayley weren't doing anything. They were teasing hugging Boston Hug Connection. They were teasing a heel turn by Bayley at one point, and they were just trying to keep them relevant, because you have Ronda Rousey who's doing the legwork to bring up the nationwide, the global awareness to women's wrestling within WWE. They put that on her shoulders as a 6-month employee. And then, but you can't ruin the future, because you don't know this at the time, but she ain't going to be around that long, right? They knew that behind the scenes. So you're in this bit of a weird dynamic. And so to bring in somebody like Nikki Bella, who, transitional champ, brought in, or left the Divas era and brought in the women's revolution. You now are at WWE Evolution. The story that they told would have been a fine story if it was executed better. Like, this is a perfect opportunity to use Nikki Bella to help put Ronda Rousey over without losing any of the momentum of the talent that you have, once Ronda leaves. So, again, you're playing chess a little bit to kind of fit all these pieces in, and I think in this instance, when it comes to Evolution, they nailed it. They nailed the booking. The execution was a little poor in the lead up, but they nailed exactly what this match needed to be, and it absolutely 100% needed to main event Evolution for all the reasons I just said.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, it doesn't hurt Nikki Bella to take a loss. She's a part-time wrestler. This was probably, well, it probably will be her last match, probably, with all the stuff that's going on with Nikki. She's kind of said that. She said, you know, never say never. This was probably her last match, and even if Nikki Bella was to come back, it's not like Nikki Bella's lost any of her pizzazz. No, it doesn't hurt Nikki to lose this match. So going into this, I was more than happy with this main eventing. I knew why it was main eventing. It was main eventing for all the reasons you just listed. Now, the actual match itself exceeded my expectations. It was a lot better than I thought it was going to be completely honest. I thought it was a pretty good match. It definitely wasn't match of the night. There was a very good match that happened directly before that with Becky and Charlotte. But we kind of knew that was going to probably steal the show. What do you think of the match itself? Do you have an expectation of it being good? Did you think it was going to be as good as it was? Was it the hype of the night? The night itself was just magical in every way. One of the best WWE pay-per-views I've seen in a long time. Still is. How did you feel about Nikki and Ronda's match?
It was the best pay-per-view of 2018.
Yeah, hands down.
Yeah, followed closely by SummerSlam, but it was the best. To me, it wasn't my favorite match because I think in an instance where you're doing something like women in WWE Evolution, you know, you pick your favorites, right? So for me, Io Shirai, you know, in the Mae Young Classic Finals against Toni Storm, like that's one that resonated well with me. Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair for the title in the Last Woman Standing match, you know, that resonates with me, right? Like Kairi Sane versus Shayna Baszler, you know, like that one. You know, it's another one where you just sit there and you're rooting so hard for these people that you've watched forever, and they're given the time to do it on a stage like this. So in all those instances, you know, I would probably pick those matches up over, you know. But again, the only criticism I have about Ronda Rousey versus Nikki Bella was that it was a 15-minute match, and I just think they spent a little too much time playing the Nikki Brie back and forth and keeping Ronda on her heels. Like. That probably was 2 minutes too long. Yeah. But outside of that, you know, this was a nice little back and forth. Nikki got her offense in. Ronda ultimately got control the way she does, and she's able to take care of Nikki soundly, which is exactly what we expect in things like this. This is a little Wrestlemania, right? Yeah,
it felt like it.
And think about Charlotte versus Trish Stratus from this past year, right? Take it back to WrestleMania 1 with Mr. T coming in, right? Like, that's the role that Nikki Bella was filling. It's just she wasn't gone long enough for people to celebrate her coming back. Yeah. People just saw it as either a cash grab or whatever the narratives were back then.
There was heaps of them.
Hard to remember. But that's what that match was, right? It was an exhibition of star and former champion legendary status. Now, people are going to sit there and say, well, Nikki Bella's not legendary status, but that is what they were going for, right?
Yeah.
I think it worked well. You know, I enjoyed the match. It's just... And was it my favorite? No, but that speaks more to the women's performances throughout the course of the night.
Yeah, it was just a really good night. It was still a good little... It was a nice little cap on the top of that night.
It was a fine match.
Yeah.
Fine match.
It was definitely not bad, and it was just... I was like, cool, that was a good match. Again, I agree with you. It probably went a little bit too long. A little bit too much of the stuff with Brie and that, but... Nothing to be like, oh, that was terrible. It was just like, okay, cool. I liked it. It got Ronda where she needed to go. If it is really Nikki Bella's last match, it's pretty cool to probably say, I wrestled Ronda Rousey in my last match. Nice little seal on the end of her career. And it did its job. Did what was necessary. And we got to experience the build to a potential Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey match. Now, at this stage, Becky was, you could probably say... maybe not at her peak, but she was certainly very much the in thing. The man was just kind of starting to take off. She was starting to really call herself the man. She was the SmackDown Women's Champion. Ronda was the Raw Women's Champion, and it looked to be we were going to have a clash at Survivor Series, which I actually thought would have main evented Survivor Series that year if it all played out. But... on the November 12th edition of Monday Night Raw, Becky Lynch led the SmackDown Women's Division to invade Raw. It was 6 days before Survivor Series. She had Ronda taken out. We had a big brawl. We had the punch, the nose, the blood, the concussion, and that match was taken away. And I at the time was like so excited to see Becky and Ronda just meet at Survivor Series. The punch happened, the concussion happened, and she was taken out, and it was, you know, a bummer. Damn, I wanted to see that, but silver lining here was that it was probably not, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I didn't want to get punched in the face, but it was probably the best thing that could have happened, because we knew, I know I can pretty confidently say I didn't even know you at the time, but you knew, like, this is Mania. This is where we're going with this. This is going to be big, especially the two stars meeting. Did you think it was probably the best thing that really could have happened?
You're right. It's a loaded question. It's so tough to know, and I'll tell you, it comes back to trust in WWE, right? Like the narrative coming out of the Survivor Series match, which we'll break down in a second, is that what Charlotte Flair did was exactly what Becky Lynch was supposed to do, right? And that it was interchangeable, but just who did it, right? At least that's what the rumor mills were in the IWC. The takeaway for me on the build here was you had the organic build of Becky Lynch, right? The underdog, SummerSlam, triple threat. She finally gets over the hump. She then solidifies it at Evolution and she is the man moving forward. Her social media game taken off around this same time. She's calling Ronda Ronnie, and we really get to see the personality of the man begin to transform on social media. They did a really good job executing all of that. This was the beginning of the downfall for Ronda in my eyes, because this really began. So where up to this point, physicality and athleticism really kept that glass ceiling apparent. Like they kept the separation between Ronda Rousey and everybody else in the divisions separate. Then professional storytelling takes over, right? The soap opera element that you were speaking of begins to take over, and character development becomes just equally as important as what you can do in the ring. Yes. And we saw that gap begin to narrow over time, because Ronda, as good as she is athletically, was being exposed both in her promos as well as her in-ring. I should say in her in-ring promos as well as in her social media game, with how she talked trash, and that suspension of disbelief started to go away, and people started to get more and more behind Becky. You know, she was already the chosen one by the fans. They already started to push her. We were force-fed Ronda at this point. We were patient. We still were patient at this point, but this is where the cracks in the castle began to happen, and the foundation started to weaken a little bit. To answer your question, was it the best thing that could have happened? No, but to have somebody like Charlotte Flair underneath to be able to take that role, that's the spoils of WWE.
Yeah. I always will think, in this time, the worst thing that ever happened to Ronda Rousey was Becky Lynch. Right. In the sense of her, just, at that, before, even with Nikki and the story there, we loved Ronda. We weren't going to boo Ronda. But the problem is that we loved Becky a lot more than we loved Ronda, because it was so organic. She was us. We picked her. Everybody picked her. Especially at that stage. You can say what you will about Becky now. A lot of people are like, whenever someone's at the top, people are going to bark at them and be like, we don't like you anymore. That's a story for a different day. But at this stage, she was on the come up. She was on her way to being the man. And all that stuff happened with Nia and the punch, and Becky got taken out, and we move into November 18th of 2018 at Survivor Series. Charlotte was the one to replace Becky, and we got Charlotte and Ronda. Now, I've noted in this match that, and you kind of alluded to it before, the crowd was really, this was the match that I always look back to, is that this is the day we first seen Ronda get booed. Especially in a sense of Charlotte, who we really didn't cheer, but she was fighting in honor of Becky in a lot of ways. She was our Becky for that one night. Not to mention this was in LA. This was in Ronda's backyard. Right. It was a very interesting dynamic, and I was just thinking in the time, regardless, before we get to the dynamic of the crowd, this match itself was really good. Charlotte and Ronda was really damn good. I wish we could have got another singles match out of the two, because the match was, they just worked so well. I think a lot of people are like, whatever with Charlotte in a lot of ways. I think Charlotte's one of the most gifted wrestlers around. I really think she's very good. Some people will agree with me, some people won't. But they just... Chemistry is a thing that we say a lot in wrestling. They had chemistry. And, you know, with all the stuff with the DQ things, Charlotte was not getting booed. At all. I remember the crowd going wild in that stage. Is there an argument for maybe it was meant to be, you know, it was interchangeable? Becky probably would have done the same thing. Who knows? We never will know. But it could have easily happened that way, and the crowd would have probably still cheered, probably louder, for Becky. What do you think about the match itself with Charlotte and Ronda, and the crowd perception of Ronda Rousey following that match?
So in retrospect, it's always fun to break down WWE, because you think that it was it as bad as we remember it being? Is it a lot like the time away, and you go back to it and then you think, well, really, was it as bad? And so I'm trying to remember kind of the build and kind of how those things happen. The biggest thing I can tell you is that when it comes to the match itself, right? Like I can be critical of builds, I can be critical of how we got there, but then what does the match look like, right? And I think you have the perfect parallel between that with Survivor Series 2018. Like, we knew the angst between Charlotte and Becky, and so for then Charlotte to take up that mantle for SmackDown, in a sense, when Becky goes out with the injury, it was confusing as hell. Like, it was a pivot, and you just kind of have to accept it as a fan. And it really rubbed me the wrong way that this is where they were headed. But then you get to the match, right? And the thing about Charlotte, yes, they push her too much. Yes, they're just letting her collect titles to begin to either match or beat her father's record. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a reason that they push her as much as they do. And it's not just because she's a Flair. It's because she is very good at what she does. She's damn near fantastic when she goes in there and can play the way she wishes to play. It's why I enjoy her and Becky so much, her and Sasha so much, her and Bayley so much, and any iteration in between, is because when she's working with people that know how to get other people over, she's a star, right? Yeah. And she gets in there with Ronda, and this is the first time that Ronda was led by somebody who knew what the hell they were doing. Yes. And then on top of that, then you get Charlotte Flair, who snaps. Her weave is going crazy. She grabs a kendo sticks, and she just brutalizes Ronda at the back half of this thing for the DQ. Just like, I don't even care about wrestling you. I'm just gonna smash your face in. Yeah. It's a hell of a piece of storytelling, and it's not something that a lot of people in WWE at the time could pull off. It wouldn't have been believable with a Ruby Riott. It wouldn't have been believable with Mickie James, Alexa Bliss, Tamina. We wouldn't have cared. But you're giving her Charlotte Flair, which is the first true test, now that Becky's not available, that Ronda's really had, because you knew Nikki wasn't going to beat her. You let these two go after each other. The title's not on the line. How is this going to play out?
We could have been Charlotte could win because she's Charlotte. She's Charlotte Flair. You never, ever count out Charlotte Flair. I never do, because when you do, that's when she wins. She's not a 10-time champion for nothing. I understand your narrative, and I understand other people being like, she's handed everything. She is. I understand it, but she's done it because she can go. Charlotte is someone that they lean on whenever they need someone. If they're like, ooh, we got nothing to do, Charlotte, because Charlotte is proven, and Charlotte can get a good match out of 90% of the roster. And not only that, she's a horsewoman. She has name value. She has a star appeal. She's Charlotte. She is still, at the end of the day, no matter what, she is a really good person to get to the next spot. I've noticed something with Charlotte is that if we need to get somewhere with another person, Charlotte's the middleman, because Charlotte can carry the story to the next. She's very transitional. You can dissect that any way you want. But Charlotte is very transitional in being like, okay, we can lean on Charlotte here because we know where we want to get to next. You can say that with whatever. And I just think here is the perfect example of, okay, Becky's not okay to go. She's hurt. What makes sense the most? I guess Charlotte. And then seeing the match, seeing the way the crowd reacted, and seeing Charlotte show a little bit of a different side of herself as well, a little bit more of an edgy, kind of crazier side with the kendo stick and just beating the absolute piss out of Ronda Rousey in this stage. It was cool. It was a really cool moment. I remember sitting there, and I'm not always like the #1 Charlotte fan in the world, especially at that time. I loved Becky, and I was like, oh, I don't really want to see Charlotte and Ronda. When I seen it, I was like, holy crap, this is really good. And I just remember being like, fuck yeah, Charlotte. Beat the crap out of Ronda Rousey. There is something said about that as someone that was a fan of Ronda in this build. Not really hating on Ronda Rousey to being kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about Ronda in this stage. I don't know if I was being worked. I don't know if that was the way that they wanted to go, but you can say what you say about it. It certainly had an effect on me and that whole entire building. It was a cool moment, and this is where I note where the crowd kind of slowly started to shift on Ronda Rousey. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100, because this is the time that she's starting to get into the programs with the people that we associate with being the top of the division, right? Up until this point, again, and I want to be careful how I say this because I don't mean it with disrespect, but, the big, I'll put it this way. I blame WWE for a lot of the problems within the women's division. I don't blame the wrestlers. So to your point about Charlotte Flair's criticisms of how many championships she's to have and what do they really mean, that's not a Charlotte Flair problem. That's a WWE booking problem. Booking.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. When
Ronda Rousey is going through the Ember Moons, Nikki Bellas, Nia Jaxes, Taminas of the world, it's not her fault that, it's good because like you want her to beat those people because you want her to get a momentum and you want to get the crowd behind her, right? For when she goes up against the Charlottes, the Sashas, the four horsewomen, right? You want that narrative. However, because WWE, and you and I have spoken about this on both our shows multiple times together, when you don't invest time in building up the mid card of your women's division, and there's such separation between the top and the middle, let alone the top and the bottom, Ronda Rousey gets to the point where she's beaten everybody, and now she has to go against the fan favorites. Well, as a WWE fan, as somebody who loves Sasha Banks, I don't want Ronda beating Sasha Banks. I don't want her beating Charlotte Flair. I don't want her to take down the man, and so making lemons out of lemonade here, Ronda Rousey gets the W because it was a DQ. Charlotte Flair looks like a badass because she had to use a weapon to finally put Ronda down. The story works, but this is where we begin to kind of see the narrative begin to change on Ronda Rousey because now you're going up against the ones that the fans have the most investment in, and that's problematic.
Yeah. I agree completely. Moving along to December 16th of 2018, we had Nia Jax win a Battle Royal at Evolution, I should say, and she got the opportunity to fight Ronda again. Another okay match between those two, but what really we need to dissect on what happened with TLC that night on December 16th is the fact that we had a TLC match for the SmackDown Women's Championship. It was Becky defending against Charlotte and Asuka. Fantastic match, wonderful match, first ever women's TLC, just a wonderful, wonderful match. Main event of the show, we had Charlotte and Becky up on the ladder, who's going to get the title first, but in comes Ronda Rousey to push down the ladder. And I just instantly, I remember saying this and whatever, I remember the ladder being pushed down, I was with friends at the time, or family, I don't know, whoever I was watching wrestling with, and I just said, I think we have our first ever Wrestlemania women's main event. We have that in the works. And at that stage, Ronda had a different demeanor when she pushed that ladder. There was a kind of a sense of carefree attitude, because I think WWE aren't, you can debate this all you want, WWE have questionable booking sometimes, but they also know what they're doing sometimes. And I think they knew what they were doing there. They knew where they were going with Ronda. They knew she was not going to get like the most, she wasn't going to be the most received for doing this, especially with Becky Lynch up there. And it led to Asuka winning. How did you feel about that moment? Were you like, this is Mania? Or were you just going, this is just where the story is needed? Did you really think that this was going to be Mania with some form of those three, or just two?
I was dead set on Becky versus Ronda coming out of TLC. I think the biggest detriment here, and it kind of goes back to what I was just talking about. Look, Asuka, is still, in my opinion, the best wrestler on WWE television, night in and night out, in the women's division. Charlotte and Becky, at that time, just their feud was amazing to watch, right? It was organic, it was built.
It was very hot.
And putting those three together was a beautiful thing. I was really, really excited about it, and they did a fantastic job. I mean, the spots in that match alone were just
Wonderful
crazy,
match.
right? And so you have all this investment in Ronda Rousey, and Ronda Rousey has to go into a rematch of, the one person that she couldn't beat for the title in a sense, right? She won the match, but by DQ, and she has to get that win back against Nia Jax, but she didn't do anything with Nia Jax outside of winning a Rumble, which, let's be honest, outside of the Royal Rumble, who cares about Battle Royals? So there's little build into that. You kind of know that Ronda's going to win. It's kind of a placeholder spot for you. Of course, you're going to have her on the show, but you're not building Ronda into being anything. So you needed her in the spot to kind of not turn heel, because at this point, remember, they were still trying to push the anti-hero.
She wasn't a heel here. Not yet.
No, Nia was the heel in the match. Ronda was still coming out waving at everybody with her goofy eyeshadow makeup.
Yes.
But this is where the convoluted booking began. And again, it's not Ronda's fault. It's the lack of WWE being able to build either Nia into a contender or anybody else on that roster into a contender to where the Ronda match would be something that I want to invest more of my time into. When I think about TLC 2018, I think about one match, and that's Asuka versus Charlotte versus Becky. That's the ABCs of WWE right there, right? They did a disservice to Ronda here.
You think?
Yeah, because they had no build, so she was in a placeholder match with the Raw Women's title after building and raising the division. They bring her in at the end and push the ladder over, which gives Asuka the title. Which, hey, to me is a face move, because I want Asuka to be the champion. As much as I liked Becky at the time, I love Asuka more.
Yeah,
but
I was happy to see Asuka win. Yeah, me too. It was a weird spot, I guess, because it was like, do I like that? Do I hate that? I'm happy that Asuka's the champ. I knew where they were kind of going, so I was kind of happy, but it was a very weird spot. So I do get what you're saying with Ronda.
Yeah, but here's where it gets overthought. So coming out of this, to answer your question, where do we go from here, right? In my head, I'm going, okay, we got Becky, Ronda, that's locked in, right? But now Asuka has the title, and we're coming off the heels of one of, if not the best match of WrestleMania, in my opinion, Mania to Mania, WrestleMania 34. We had Asuka versus Charlotte.
Yes.
So now we could have Asuka Charlotte 2, except now Asuka's the champ, right, at WrestleMania 35, and we get Ronda versus Becky, the most dominant versus the most over, like for the Raw title. This is setting up beautifully. So I was huge into Ronda coming out and getting involved. I just think that they did a disservice to her on the show because their lack of building the undercard underneath to make Nia either more viable or anybody else more viable for Ronda kind of took momentum away from her at this point in time.
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. And we'll move along to the start of 2019, 27th of January at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Ronda Rousey was, I guess, on the hunt of the 4 horsewomen, I guess you could say, because she did take on Sasha Banks. We knew this match was going to happen at some stage. Banks and Rousey. Royal Rumble, it happened. It was a pretty decent match. I liked it. But the problem is that we were so into the Royal Rumble, the WrestleMania, on the road to WrestleMania, I didn't think that Sasha had a chance of winning. Which is bad to say, because I'm a fan of Banks, but it just wasn't happening at that stage. It was timing of this match, I guess you could say, was just a bit, we're in the zone, we knew where we were going. Nonetheless, it was a really fun match. And again, I think it's a little bit of a match that gets a little bit overlooked, by bigger ones. What do you think about the match itself, and did you at all ever think that Banks was going to get the W here?
No, there was a 0% chance Sasha. Look, I know there's a lot of Sasha stands out there, and And the thing is that of all the four horsewomen, Sasha's always been my favorite, right? Still to this day. And I backed her all the way through her leaving and coming back, story that she had a little while ago. But this was the right decision, right?
Yes.
Like, you need it. You have Becky and you have Charlotte, and you can't burn those two yet. And at the time, I'm still thinking in my head, Asuka, Charlotte 2, as well as Becky, Ronda at WrestleMania. Bailey, look, I like Bailey, but at the time, Bailey's the best friend. She's the sidekick. She's
there was a
the
gap.
number 2. Yeah, she doesn't draw enough. Sasha is a star. Right, and Sasha's can go in there, and people give me a lot of flack because I like her in-ring work rate. Right, I think she does. She takes risks when she goes out and wrestles, which either the performer that she's working with doesn't know how to react to, or she's overconfident in her execution, and things come off unclean from time to time. But you put her in there with somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, and Sasha Banks looks like a star. She, in my opinion, when you put her and Charlotte together, for example, Charlotte does Charlotte, but Sasha looks 15 times better because she's working with somebody in there who knows what they're doing.
Looks like $1 million, yeah.
She went in there and her job was to get Ronda over, and she succeeded. That match was fantastic. That was 14 minutes of giving Ronda a true test of what professional wrestling is. No, she shouldn't have won, but she accomplished her job that night. She earned her paycheck because she put Ronda back on the pedestal of professional wrestling, right? And we lost that a little bit along the way here. She was leaning more towards that Bill Goldberg squash, I don't know how to wrestle type of narrative. And Sasha Banks put her back on the right track. This was the best showing that Ronda Rousey has had in ring up to this point, and the only person that you can thank for that is Sasha Banks.
That is very true. Banks is very good at what she does. I've always been a Sasha Banks fan. There was times where I fell off a little bit, but when it comes bell to bell, I'm all in with Sasha. And her and Rousey I knew was going to be fun. I had a lot of hope for that match, and it was certainly a really fun match, and it did what needed to do. Made Rousey look as good as she possibly can just a couple months out from WrestleMania. So there was no problem, in my mind going, okay, Banks isn't going to win, but just how we get there is important. The next night on Raw, January 28th, Ronda Rousey, of course, had that tradition where she was, after pay-per-views, she was having an open challenge for the Raw Women's title. Bayley come out, and I guess, again, checking off the horsewomen on the list again. Her and Bayley had a really good match. It wasn't as good as her and Banks, but it was still very good. And she beat Bayley, retained the championship, and then out comes the winner of the 2019 Women's Royal Rumble, Becky Lynch, and challenges Ronda Rousey. And it seems we have a nice, clear path to WrestleMania. Becky and Ronda. That place when Becky said, "I choose you," I mean, it was bonkers in that place. It was absolutely bonkers. It was just, people were ready for that. People were so ready to see Becky and Ronda go one-on-one, and man, what were you feeling in that moment? Because I know I was just smiling.
It's exactly what it needed to be. Like, these things don't have to be complicated from time to time, and you have your most over superstar in Becky Lynch, and your most dominant in the story writes itself, right? Like, you can get to from point A to point B. You can do the entire road of WrestleMania based off that one promo in the ring. You don't need to do anything else. The road is a straight road right to WrestleMania, and at the moment when that happened, I was 100% invested in, hell yeah, fuck yeah, let's get this done.
Yeah. No, yeah. It was just those words, "I choose you." I was just like, oh, I'm ready. I'm ready for this. But, well, we had some twists and turns on the way to WrestleMania, I guess is the easiest way to put it. I am in the boat of, I wish sometimes a predictable story is not a bad thing. What's proven works, and a lot can be said about this story and how they really probably overcomplicated this story to a lot of points. But we did get from point A to point B. On February 11th, it took a real big turn. when the end of Raw happened and Becky Lynch was replaced with Charlotte Flair, which sent the world into a frenzy. And I had no doubt in my mind that we were going to get back to Becky being in the match, but at that stage when Charlotte was added, I was pretty certain that we were going to get a triple threat. I always was kind of on the team of a triple threat, to be completely honest. I always thought we were going to get a triple threat, but there's certainly points where I had my doubts and going, okay, maybe we're just going to get Ronda and Becky. Now, when Charlotte was added into this match, I was like, oh boy. But even thinking about it now and even trying to see what my feeling was then, and just from memory, I was like, this is a pretty good storytelling moment into have, like, you know, people always say Charlotte's handed everything. It's like, okay, let's hand her this opportunity and storyline to get her into this match. Did you think it was, even with your brain of going Asuka and Charlotte, even taking away that, did you think it was a good move? Did you think it was a good way to add another element into this match? Because at this point, it wasn't, like, overcomplicated in the sense of, like, the injury side of things. There was the knee and stuff like that. But at this point, this was before Elimination Chamber, before Fastlane. It was, I think, if anything, it was maybe, like, the last piece of the puzzle. Obviously, it wasn't, from what we'll talk about in a minute. But did you like this?
In the moment, no, I hated it.
Okay.
I hated it.
A lot of people did.
Yeah, and here's the reason why. You had your matches, right? Like, so it goes back to what you want as a fan, right? And McMahon's give me what I want, right? You know, you've just dedicated the entire year of 2018 to lifting up the women's division. Right, you have the opportunity to capitalize not only Ronda versus Becky, but and I'm going to go back to it, and I know that I kind of prefaced it with my fandom, but then you got, you know, Charlotte versus Asuka 2, right, which then you could have turned into, you know, Charlotte versus Asuka 3 at this year's WrestleMania coming up 2020. Right, like there are so many different things that you could have done to elevate the women's division and cement your stars for both moving forward, right? And you begin this complication, because to your point, it wasn't that it got more convoluted after this, right? But in the moment, my frustrations lied with the fact that you're going with what you know. You're not taking the risk to put the trust in the division to get you to where they need to be, right?
Yeah.
You spent this entire year putting them out front and center for everybody, and now we get close to WrestleMania, and now you begin to pull them back, and that pisses me off, right? Because it goes against everything that you've been doing in a sense, so in that instance, it pissed me off. Now, the narrative moving forward, and something I've always been on record of saying, does Charlotte, given what Charlotte is, who she is, and how she works in the ring, and her talents, is she deserving to be in the first women's main event of WrestleMania? The answer to that question is yes, she is. So, was it the worst thing to happen, Ronda versus Becky versus Charlotte? No, of course not, because all three of those women deserved, with the 2018 that they had, to be there. My frustration lies is it was a short-term look, or it was them looking out short-term instead of looking out long-term, and what something like Asuka versus Charlotte 2 could have done for that division coming into 2019 and the momentum that they had, versus, you know, relying on what they feel works in the interim by putting Charlotte, by making Charlotte happy in a sense. Now, I'm not putting that on Charlotte, certainly. I'm just saying, like, that narrative, you know, it drives me crazy, because they've taken a step back this year, in my opinion, instead of progressing forward. And this decision right here, this night, is the reason why. Like, this was the catalyst to take a step back in 2019 with the women's division instead of propelling it forward. It still sits raw with me to this day.
That's fair. That's a fair argument. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, you're wrong. I'm not, because there's a lot of points in there that I'm like, you're right. I had a lot of emotions going on at that point. I'm at the very forefront of it. I was like, what the fuck? And then I was like, this is cool. I was kind of on that team anyway. Like I said, I thought it was going to be a triple threat. There's a lot of arguments going into that decision. And that's where I'll kind of leave that moving into February 18th. But it was the start of the overcomplication of things. We go into Elimination Chamber. Rousey is taking on Ruby Riott for some reason. I guess just to get her on the card. Charlotte is watching this match. Ronda runs through Ruby in like a minute. It was nothing. Becky at this point, I should note, was suspended, by the way, for something. Why was Becky why did Vince suspend Becky? Did she attack someone or?
Yeah, she first. It was either she punched or she put Stephanie in the disarmor.
That's right. Okay, so she was suspended for 60 days. So at that point, it was after WrestleMania or something like that. So she was going to be suspended. Charlotte was watching this match because obviously at this point it was just going to be Ronda and Charlotte at WrestleMania. And then Becky comes in and, all hell breaks loose. She beats them up with her crutch because her knee from the Rumble was still hurting. And this is when I started to get a little bit like, I was still excited because I knew the potential of where we were going. Even in this stage, but I was just like, why are we starting to overcomplicate everything with injuries and suspensions when this could have just been a simple story? Even with the Charlotte thing added, it still could have been a very simple story of like, it doesn't need a lot of bells and whistles. It was just a triple threat. We had history. We had people that were over. The overcomplication of this really made it a little bit of a head scratcher for me. However, I was still excited. When really things started to take another turn was on the March 4th edition of Raw this year when Rousey really turned heel. And this is when Rousey kind of cut that promo, beat up, said screw the woo and whatever. It was cheesy. But then she started to go on these social media videos of saying, wrestling's fake and all of this kind of stuff to really kind of get the heel reaction that I guess they were looking for. Where were you on the fence of this one? Do you think performers should be going out and saying wrestling is fake? We all know what it is. I don't really call it fake, but it is a scripted environment. We've known that for a long time. Do you think that a heel, in this sense, who is someone that was legitimate, she come from a legitimate fighting company, do you think this is a good way to get heel heat, or is this cheap?
Well, it's cheap heat for sure. In this instance, with the character that they had, I was perfectly okay with it, right? I think, it like in the moment, I remember going on a couple different shows and kind of just talking about this is the crumbling of Ronda Rousey, right? This is, this is her breaking kayfabe, and this is her going into business for herself, and she doesn't need to put up with this. She's got thin skin, and she's always been, the heir apparent everywhere she's gone, and now this is the end of the UFC career and her taking her ball and going home, and that's what we're seeing with Ronda Rousey now because the fans have turned on her and all this type of stuff. Probably not the best narrative looking back on it. I probably was buying into it a little much, and I was probably just kind of I was taking certain liberties that I probably shouldn't have been taking. It's nice to kind of reflect back. When you asked me to do this, I went back and kind of relived a couple moments and said, knowing what I know now, this is probably more kayfabe than it was a shoot, which means they executed well. It's just because we were, again, you're looking down the mountain and there's a straight path to WrestleMania, and instead we decided to take, the expert mode road where we're going twists and turns and ups and downs.
All the side streets. We took all the side streets in this one when it wasn't, it was just as easy just to go.
It just wasn't necessary.
Yeah, it doesn't get you there any quicker. It doesn't get you there for better scenery. It's just going a different way because it's different. And that's not necessarily... I've always said this, and I'll continue to say this. Predictability in wrestling isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just nice to go where the story needs to go. We knew what we were getting at the end of WrestleMania regardless of all this, and that was Becky Lynch. This was what this story was for. And, you can say what you will. I don't know how you feel on predictability in wrestling, but sometimes to me, it doesn't necessarily mean bad. Sometimes it's okay to get what we're expecting. Don't shock to shock.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on board. Different doesn't always mean good, and simplicity is sometimes all you need. I will tell you, and a fun fact, I don't know if you knew this, but Ronda Rousey in the build up to WrestleMania 35 here. Do you know that from February 10th through the night before WrestleMania, she defended the title 11 times?
Really?
Nia Jax once, Ruby Riott 5 or 6 times in a row, Dana Brooke 4 times in a row after that, and then WrestleMania happened.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
Wow.
They tried to, one, pad her stats a little bit, right, going up against Charlotte and Becky, but more importantly than that, they were trying to get work in for her because they needed her to expedite her skill set because of who she was going in there with, right?
That's true.
The
So
aura
this was like TV and live events, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah, this was. I mean, Ruby Riott was. It was 4 days in a row she defended the title against her all over the country in house shows.
Right.
They then go to Raw, or they then go to the Elimination Chamber, minute 40 match like we talked about before, and then if you remember, the next night she had Ruby Riott again, which was like a 12-minute match.
And they had a good match from memory.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. And that's really to your point of like they had to make sure she was kind of fine-tuning her ends, if you will, to get in the ring, especially with what was announced later in the month of March. But before we get there, we obviously had Fastlane. There was a match between Becky and Charlotte. Some kind of hold harmless agreement was signed because Becky, at this point, I think every limb was sore. She seemed to have every bandage on at some stage. But if Becky won, it'd become a triple threat. Now, obviously, this is where we knew we were kind of going to WrestleMania. Obviously, it wasn't going to be Charlotte and Ronda. We're going to get a triple threat. But obviously, Ronda come in and attacked Becky to allow her to win, so it was a triple threat, because in Ronda's mindset, I guess she said, I can beat both of them. This was the kind of the last, I don't want to say it was the last, defiant, like, twist and turn, because there wasn't really too many more, but here, I mean, at least in the Fastlane match, and Ronda coming out and doing that, at least I go, okay, at least we know where we're going. This is the final stretch towards Mania now, so I was happy with it. Although it was overcomplicated, I was saying, at least we know where we're on now, and this is the final stretch, the final drive. We're off the side street, at least, for the most part. Were you okay with how they got out of the Fastlane match with the way Becky won? Because obviously if Becky just beat Charlotte, with one leg, I think it would have made Charlotte look horrible.
It's a good question. The answer is no. No, I was not. I was pretty. Here's the thing. Here's what drives me crazy about the end of Ronda's run here with WWE. The triple threat main event at WrestleMania, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Ronda Rousey, was the culmination of everything I've talked about as far as raising the women into a higher platform than they were before, right? Ronda Rousey helped do that, right? Becky was part of it organically, but Ronda is the reason that they put so much emphasis on the women in 2018, right? By the time we got to Fastlane, and more specifically in the Monday after Fastlane, I was so checked out of that storyline. I was so malnourished, or not malnourished. I'm so depleted of care and empathy and want for Charlotte versus Becky versus Ronda. I talked about it multiple times where it's not. When we got to WrestleMania, I was invested because A, I knew how important it was, and B, I knew it was going to be something special, right?
Yeah.
But the road to get there is just so. I liken it this way, Josh, and this is good for you because you're in Australia, so everywhere where you go, it's like this, right? I love going on vacation. Right, and I get excited to go on vacation, and I'm looking forward to that time of year where I can go to somewhere tropical and drink Mai Tais by the pool, for forever, right? But I have to do a travel day before I get there, And that travel day takes it out of me to that when I get to the destination that I need to get to, I want to go inside and I want to hit the bed and I want to
Yeah.
take the rest of that day to recharge.
Yeah.
That's what this build was. Like,
Yeah, that
vacation was
is.
around the
Yeah.
corner,
We
but
knew we were going, and we're happy, but the basically the plane ride was awful. There was a
it was
lot of
awful.
turbulence. There was so much turbulence. It was just like
Mhm.
it was. Yeah, I understand that, and I definitely agree with you. It was just I was very tired of the situation because they threw so many things at me. What body part was Becky Lynch meant to be sore today? Where was Charlotte involved in this today? What was Ronda saying about the business today? It was a lot. Instead of just being one little thing, it could have just been a nice, simple, nice story, and we would have got to the same spot. We would have had the same amount of love. It did take a lot of. It was a very bumpy ride. But to put a positive spin on things, on March 25th, 2019, the very beginning of Raw, Stephanie McMahon came out to announce that for the first time ever, the women would be main eventing WrestleMania at WrestleMania 35 with winner take all, because Charlotte had beaten Asuka the week prior to gain the SmackDown Women's Championship. So this was winner take all. This was the main event. Regardless of all of the twists and turns and the feeling so depleted with this story, it was pretty hard not to have a smile when you heard that or just seen that news and go, this is still pretty. I mean, you can't really get bigger than main eventing WrestleMania. No matter what someone says about WWE, it might not be the best wrestling in the world. There's certainly great wrestling involved in it, but it is the number one wrestling company in the world, in the sense of it's the most recognizable wrestling company in the world. It's the pinnacle. WrestleMania is the biggest show in wrestling all year. You really can't get bigger than the main event of WrestleMania, and it's never been. It was before that. It was never done before. It was not something really conceivable. Maybe even like 3 years before that, you wouldn't have ever thought that this was going to happen. But really, it was, all the right people involved, in my opinion. Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda. They all earned that spot. And it was a pretty big deal. When you seen that announcement, were you just like, wow, they're actually doing this?
Yeah, so to go back to the vacation analogy for a second, March 25th, 2019, that was the next morning of the vacation, right? That's where the investment and the excitability we're 10 days out from WrestleMania at that point, so you're already feeling excited. The bullshit trip to get there is over, and now it's time to enjoy the spoils of what we've worked so hard to be able to enjoy, right? Cynical fans out there, and I love you to death because you keep me honest. You can nitpick the next 10 days, right? The Beat the Clock Challenge and Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda all together against the Riot Squad the following week on Raw. You can do that, right? But when Stephanie McMahon comes out on March 25th and says, we're going to have the first women's main event at WrestleMania, I'm not going to say everything was forgiven and forgotten, because clearly we just spent 10 minutes on it. But it's now time to put that narrative to bed and enjoy what's about to happen, because it's history. It's a moment in history that we're all able to experience, and for a lot of us, we never thought might happen.
You can't get a first ever again. No matter if they were main eventing the next 10 years in a row. It's only one first ever, and that moment, I feel like the last 10 days before WrestleMania, from that moment until WrestleMania, was the best bit of storytelling they actually did in the time of this whole story. Like, there was no overcomplication. There was none of that. It was just a nice bit of storytelling between the three ladies and, I guess, the Riot Squad going into WrestleMania. It was the most excited I had been for that match in the whole time, because I was just like, I'm not having to think about everything. It was pretty simple. It was just a beat the clock, and then a 6-woman tag, and a big, huge brawl. And speaking of that brawl, on April 1st, 2019, they had a very unique style of brawl. It was very different to something that WWE really done. I really liked it. A lot of people thought it was silly. A lot of people thought it was cheesy. I liked it. I don't know how you felt about that brawl, but it was certainly a very different approach to the way they filmed it, to the way it was with the car and the window breaking, and it was just like the drive. It was very different. How did you feel about that? Did you find it cheesy?
No, like that's the type of stuff. The only thing that frustrated me about that segment was that you could have done stuff like that for the lead up from Royal Rumble, right?
Yes, I agree.
Like you could have done segments like that both on Raw and SmackDown and involving all three of them at some point, right? Like the only time that I feel cheapened in this entire run, this back third of Ronda's run, is the fact that you could have done things like that to keep me invested without having to go through all the navigating the waters of who's in it, who's not, or keep Becky. You know, oh no, now she's going to get in, and it's not even going to be on her own volition. It's going to be on Ronda Rousey getting involved. Like it just got too convoluted.
Yeah.
And then you look at what they did on April 1st with the cop car and the beat downs and breaking and you said that you're like, God damn it, like. You could have done that for 3 months, and I would have been a happy camper.
Oh,
like,
man, it would have been the easiest trip of my lifetime. It would have just been smooth sailings.
Right, which then cemented all my frustrations. So those will never go away. But it was a great, in my opinion, it was a great segment. It was a great segment.
It was fantastic. I know some people, there was certain bits of it that I was like, haha, that's kind of funny when she drove the car and stuff like that. But I thought it was good. Some of the times the funny side of wrestling is what I like most. There was bits in it that I was like, okay, haha. But I love that. That's kind of like, you know me at this point, JPQ. I love wrestling and I love a good wrestling match as much as you do, but I'm made it pretty aware that my favorite side of wrestling is the entertainment side. Some of my favorite things of wrestling isn't necessarily the matches. It's the segments. It's the moments. That's what I look for in wrestling. That's what I love about wrestling. I love wrestling, don't get me wrong. I love a good bell-to-bell, 5-star classic as much as the next guy. But that's some of my favorite sides of wrestling. And, some people say that I'm a different kind of wrestling fan. I don't really, I still feel, that's still wrestling to me. But that's what I love the most. And this segment is perfect proof of that. I love this segment. And it did more to me in the build of this match than maybe anything of that time. But April 7th, 2019, we are now a Mania to Mania, WrestleMania 35, triple threat, main event, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Ronda Rousey, winner take all. WrestleMania is a long show. I have no problem with it being a long show because it's WrestleMania. I'm still going to watch it if it was, 20 hours long. That's a lot, but you know what I mean. It is a long show. It's a long time to wait for. If you're someone that is a casual fan, that's a long show to watch through just to get to that match. But that was the marquee match. That was the last match of the night. It's pretty cool to say that they got to do that. I've only ever watched this match once through, which is really weird for me. Usually I watch something and I like to watch and then feel the moment and then watch again to kind of analyze it. And then just, it becomes a part of, like, something I'll go and watch. I've only ever watched this match once through. From memory, the match was okay. It was a pretty good main event. What I want to talk to you about is the thing that kind of everyone was talking about after that match. Was the ending, for a lack of a better term, botched?
Yeah, I don't know. Of course it was.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
But do you think that was the way the match was meant to end? Do you think that crucifix pin was the way the match was meant to end? Or did Ronda get was there another spot that would have followed that? I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? Because I don't think we'll ever really know if that was meant to be the finish or not. But it did seem the match was cut a little bit short.
Yeah, for sure. Which is funny because it's like a 21-minute main event at WrestleMania. Yeah, I mean, it totally was
21 minutes, that match.
21 minutes, yeah. Isn't that
Holy
crazy?
Moly. I don't remember it being that long.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's a testament to them in the ring. It feels shorter because it's a triple threat. And I'm not a huge triple threat fan, although I thought this one was done.
See, I'm the opposite
pretty
to you.
decent.
Triple threat is my favorite kind of match. I just think it's the perfect number in wrestling. But
I like it. I like triple threats, not for titles in main event spots, especially on the biggest show of them all. Like that, I have a contingency on it. But to your point, Yeah, they do. It's true. And again, I don't mind it on Fastlane, right? I don't mind it.
No, I get it.
TLC was a great triple threat. You know what I mean? Although it didn't main event, but it's something about triple threats at WrestleMania for the title that just yeah, it's not my favorite. Although in
I
this
get it,
instance,
because it's a very easy way to get someone not to take a fall.
right, exactly. And in this instance, that's part of the reason that Charlotte Flair was in it, in my opinion. Was it botched? Was this the spot that it was supposed to end on? There's not one person that has presented an argument, nor will there ever be a person that can present an argument that is going to convince me that the first women's main event at WrestleMania with a triple threat with 2 titles on the line was going to end on a crucifix pin. Like, it's just not rational thought for me. You know what I mean? Like, there's just none of these 3. That's not part of the repertoire, right? That we see them win with.
That's fair.
So in that instance, they certainly botched it. Now, people put a lot.
It was botched, but I think more of my point was that the spot that was meant to end it. But it was certainly botched because Ronda, or whoever's fault it was, it's hard to tell. It's probably more Ronda's, but who knows? Her shoulders were clearly off the mat.
They're up.
And not only that, is that the reason I think maybe that spot wasn't meant to end that match is because of how confused Michael Cole was. That's how I judge things. Not so much the other commentators, because I don't know if necessarily Corey Graves has said in many interviews that he doesn't like to be told finishes of matches because he just likes to have a genuine reaction. But I couldn't say the same that Michael Cole wouldn't know what the finish of that match was because he has to prepare. He's the lead guy on a commentary table. He has to get his call in. So I don't really pay attention to Renee and Corey's reaction so much as I pay attention to Michael Cole's. Now, that's a really weird way of thinking. I get it. But that's how I kind of was like... I even remember being in the room with a lot of people watching WrestleMania and going like, did that just end? Because we all seen on the camera that her shoulders were not down in that instance at all. They were down and then up and then down again. So that, to me, why would you go back into the spot of having your shoulders down? That's the only reason I say is, like, was that spot meant to end the match? But, like, to your point, would you really end the first ever women's main event of WrestleMania on a roll-up, on a crucifix pin? It just seems a little, odd. You wouldn't have a decisive win. But then there's the argument of maybe the finish was to protect Ronda. Maybe it was to, seem because Becky Lynch was kind of the oddball out. That, she had a roll-up and she just won out of nowhere, but we still love her. That we'll never know. We'll never know the true answer to that because usually they, have those 24 specials where they talk about that kind of stuff, but they don't on this. They have no, Becky has never answered it in interviews. Ronda never has. Charlotte never has. I guess Charlotte's kind of the one that's kind of like, what? I was on the outside. It wasn't really, if it was wrong, it wasn't my fault. So she can kind of be like, I was just, ready for my next spot, I guess you would say. We will never know, though, what was truly meant to happen that night. I think we know where we're going, and I think we know that Becky was going to win, because there wasn't any other way to go. But who knows with that spot? Regardless, a lot can be said since that night with Becky. Obviously, we haven't seen Ronda again. Ronda's gone away, and she wants to have children and start, have a family. A lot can be said about that night, and again, short-term booking versus long-term booking. I mean, Becky lost the title to Charlotte lost the title to Bayley, and then, we are where we are. That match itself, did you enjoy the match, or did the finish take it away for you?
No, I mean, the match was great. Again, like, it's WrestleMania, right? So it's the culmination of a whole bunch of stuff, and so you go back and you watch some of these moments, and the analytical side takes over, right? So was it the cleanest match? Was it supposed to be, the criticism of Ronda Rousey? How's Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair going to work with them? How they, you can play that game till you're blue in the face, and I would encourage you,
Josh, hair out if we did that all the time, wouldn't we?
Yeah, but it's true. I would encourage you to go back and do that because because I did, right? And I went back and I watched the analytical side of it, right? or watch it with an analytical eye. In the moment, that is not why I'm watching that match. I'm watching that match because it's a one moment in time. It's a historical moment in not just WWE, but in the annals of wrestling history. Like, this match was bigger than the work rate that they put into it, and so I didn't even. It's not even that I forgave some of the uncleanliness of the match, the execution of the match. It was, this needs to be celebrated because of what it is, not because of how they execute it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get you completely.
And that was the feeling coming out of it. Was it a little flat finish? Is that a little disappointing? Sure, but overall,
we still got what we wanted.
Right, the totality of it all, the moment itself will live in infamy in wrestling history, and that's the point.
That scene of Becky with the pyro and holding up the 2 titles, I mean, that's what we wanted.
Right, it's dynamic.
But, of course, the finish had to give us something, give a lot of people that were naysayers of something to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, and then you lean into it and you say that, Ronda Rousey, when she makes her return, she's still the champion because, again, they leaned into it. They did what they needed to do with it. But at the end of the day, look, if every single wrestling match that you watch is based off of, and I'm a big guy like that, right? Like, I break a lot of things down within wrestling, but I got my guilty pleasures too. Right, I got Stardom, GCW, and I don't need the cleanest work rate, and I don't need everything to make sense all the time. WWE suffers from oversaturation and the conditionality of the fans to one way of wrestling, which then causes frustration when they go against their own formula by not making sense, and that's where a lot of the resentment lies with WWE. But at WrestleMania, this isn't
WrestleMania is bigger than wrestling.
Right.
In my opinion.
It's the biggest stage of them all. It's, AJ Styles Nakamura is a technical, master. It should be a technical masterpiece. And when it's not, you get frustrated because that's what that match should be, right? Daniel Bryan, Kofi Kingston, they both can go and they both had a great match, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what the match was because it was the moment after with Kofi.
WrestleMania, when we're talking about WrestleMania 34, to go Mania to Mania, it's not about the wrestling at WrestleMania. It's about the moments. Right. I mean, there's been great matches at WrestleMania, sure, but I don't really remember great matches at WrestleMania. I remember great moments at WrestleMania. I remember Becky winning the championship. I remember Shawn Michaels retiring. Of course, there's been fantastic matches at WrestleMania. But again, WrestleMania is really built on moments. It's bigger than wrestling. Everybody watches WrestleMania. People that don't watch wrestling all year watch WrestleMania. And that's still the same to this day. It's the Super Bowl of wrestling. It's the grand finale of wrestling. If there was an off-season of wrestling, this is what would be the grand, finale of wrestling.
Correct.
It's just WrestleMania exceeds its name, in my opinion. So, you say what you will. Everyone, if you want to dissect that match, a lot of people did. A lot of people still do. Cool. Whatever. The moment we wanted, the moment we needed, we still got. And I'm glad that I was watching, that WrestleMania main event, because that feeling will never happen again. Even if they were to main event again next year, it doesn't. It's still big. It's still a great thing, but it's not the first ever, so you can never get that again. And I'm just happy that we got a cool moment out of that match. And that was the lasting impression of WrestleMania this year. Can't take that away from any of those ladies. So, it was a great ending to that Mania. Now, we've now gone from Mania to Mania with Ronda Rousey. A few more things. First and foremost, what was your favorite Ronda Rousey match of the entire year of this Mania to Mania?
Okay, so it's in the totality of her year. I think it goes back to her. We talked about all the matches, didn't we? It was her versus. I want to say WrestleMania. I want to say the WrestleMania match, but I'm not going to. It's the Alexa Bliss match. The night after SummerSlam, right? That's the one No, excuse me. No, I'm wrong. It's Hell in a Cell. It's Hell in a
Okay,
Cell
yeah.
against Alexa Bliss. There's so many Alexa Bliss challenges in a row. Alexa Bliss versus Ronda Rousey at Hell in a Cell 2018 was the match for me because it was the one that I sat there and I said, she went 12 minutes. She was able to handle her own. She's not going to be a squash machine. And like she was, but like
It was a
she had some
proving ground
credibility.
match for you.
Yeah,
It was like,
it's a
okay,
perfect way of putting it.
You made
Beautiful.
me believe that you can
Right.
go and that you are
Right.
not just going to be a run-through machine, that you're going to actually wrestle these other ladies.
Right, exactly right, and that's and I needed that for me to fully invest into Ronda Rousey. Was that match at Hell in a Cell?
That's fair. That's a good answer. Mine is Charlotte. Her match with Charlotte at Survivor Series is my favorite Rousey match of that year. I just think it was just everything just fell into place really nicely in that match, and they just clicked really well. There was a spot in that match that was a spear, and Ronda just sold it so nicely. That's me overanalyzing wrestling again, but she just sold it really nicely, and I remember the crowd being really on its feet. Something that I've just nitpicking, and really like looking into things. Ronda Rousey is really good at kicking out. You know, there's people when I say that are like, they just get it at the right moment, and you don't know that they're going to kick out. And those moments when, even if you think someone's not going to win, you're like, oh my god, they nearly won. Ronda Rousey is really good at kicking out, and that's just
That's
one
a
of my
great
favorite
point.
things. I love a good kick out. There's nothing better. You know when it's like you go, ooh, I wish they waited a little longer. And I understand it would probably be very hard because you're probably like, I don't want to not kick out. But Rousey is one of the better ones that I've seen that kicking out. She doesn't get her legs up ready to kick out. She's down and she's out. And she's not looking... People that look at the referee is like a big pet peeve of mine in wrestling, and I don't know why. I understand why they do it. But you know when someone's like down out, they just got like, you know, punched right in the face, and they're looking back and they're looking at the referee to see when their hand's going to hit? I hate that. It's like, I know you're getting ready to kick out. Don't show me.
Yeah, to tell.
I like... Is that's probably me just being a little bitch about it, but
No, it's a real thing. Like if you watch wrestling, like that is something that you look for. If you know, if there's a history of in the match of looking at the ref, as soon as they're not looking at the ref, you know the finish is there,
Exactly.
right? So you lose the suspension of disbelief when they're as apparent with it.
yeah,
that goes to
Rousey's
camera
really,
angle. And ref
really,
things.
Rousey's really good at kicking out. Just that, I
Yeah,
just
it was-
remember that.
It was a great point because it wasn't just even the fact that she had the cadence down to where she kicked out at the 2.9, right? It was when she kicked out, it was power or it was a quick movement. Like there was athleticism to the way she
There's
kicked
an art
out to
to
where yeah. So I'm down with that. As soon as you said it, it resonated with me. So I think you're onto something.
Yeah, and I just really love the Charlotte Rousey match at Survivor Series. So that was probably my favorite match that she's had. Overall, with Rousey's time from, really this was her year in wrestling. I know she came in a little bit earlier, but this was really her stunt in wrestling, her stint, if you will, her run. Whether she comes back or not is another question. But
Right.
overall, do you think Rousey's year was a successful one?
Can I answer this two ways?
Of course.
Okay. Was it successful? Yes, it was. For only being in the wrestling game for 12 months, right? 14 if you want to be generous. She got a lot accomplished.
Yeah.
And that speaks to everything about who she is as an athlete, jumping in 2 feet, into this crazy world of wrestling. It's hard for me to sit here and say that Ronda Rousey didn't have, in its totality, a good run, given how green she was to the business, right? Mm-hmm. With that said, she was able to accomplish so much, and this has been kind of my running narrative this entire time, with regards to elevating the women's divisions, both SmackDown and Raw, through her year there. Where she fails is... And it's not right to put on her, but when I say fails, it's not Ronda herself. It's WWE. Ronda did her part to elevate this division to the point where WWE could take the ball and run with it. I mean, shit, you came on No Particular Angle after WrestleMania, and we talked about what was next for the women's division, and we had all these crazy ideas, good ideas, things that they could have done, and pivot to capitalize on the the strength and backing of what Ronda Rousey was able to do. And not only have they not done that, it seems as if WWE has regressed over the course of the year, in the last 6 months, with regards to who they push, who they don't, and who they commit their time and resources to in the women's division. You know, they gave us what we wanted. We proved that we wanted it. And then coming into 2019, they've completely not just dropped the ball, but shattered what it is that we wanted, and the work that Ronda Rousey put in to get us to the point where we can progress this thing further. In that instance, the Ronda Rousey run has failed, but that's not Ronda Rousey's fault.
It's almost like a butterfly effect of the stuff you do with Ronda will trickle down to every part of the women's division, and the way that they book around Ronda Rousey, I guess, would be a sensible way of putting it. But kayfabe wise, she had a stellar year, one of the best debut years maybe ever. But I understand what you mean. It's the stuff that happens afterwards that matters most. It's the lasting impression that you leave, and are you leaving this place better than when you got here? And that's debatable a lot with Rousey. And again, to your point, you're not saying that she failed because of her. It's definitely not the case at all. It's just the butterfly effect of how WWE operates. And
well, think of it this way: when Ronda left, right? You've cemented Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair as the heir apparents. You had new tag team champions in the Iconics, the first real tag team to win that. Yes, Sasha's leaving for a little while after. You still didn't have an undercard. You had the opportunity to build it. Becky could have built stars. We saw a little inkling of that when they brought Lacey Evans up after and she challenged Becky. You could have invested time. You could have invested energy and resources and storylines into creating interesting parallels with not just the women's wrestlers, but bringing in women's writers to write for them. And you really could have pushed a narrative unlike anything that's going in wrestling today. And that was all built off the hard work that Ronda Rousey put into this year of wrestling to get them to the point to trust that the women will get them to the finish line. And they pulled the fuck back, and it drives me crazy. So yes, Ronda succeeded with her greenness and being able to perform at such a high level in the biggest stage of them all, start to finish, including a WrestleMania main event. The Ronda Rousey experiment failed because she built the women's division, and WWE doesn't have enough forethought or enough trust or enough intuition to take that ball and run with it. And in that instance, they failed.
Okay, I understand that completely. There's a whole nother episode that we could probably go into on that, to be completely honest with you. Yes or no question. Has Ronda Rousey wrestled her last match?
That's a good one. How about... I'm going to say no, but I'll qualify it by only saying that I think she's done doing any type of long-term run.
Yeah. Completely agreed. She's never going to be like a full/part-time wrestler again. It's going to be in little tiny increments of like, we need her for a Mania, we need her for a SummerSlam, we need her for this program. It's not going to be in, long stints of like another year here or another like 8 months here. It's definitely not going to be like that. And I guess it's all dependent on Rousey with her family when she decides to, want to start this family and want to get that. Because sometimes it happens with, she's very much, I've watched many interviews with her post WWE stuff and just her YouTube channel and stuff. She's very much in the zone of, she said, like, I don't know if I'll ever wrestle again because I don't know what I'm going to be like when I start a family. She might just be like, listen, Ronda Rousey has probably made enough money to last her for the rest of her life, I'm pretty sure at this point. So she could probably just be like, yeah, I'm just going to have a family and enjoy being a mother. Because she said that's one of her dreams. And hey, it might all change when she has a child and she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I know she very much misses the business, and she said that on many, many occasions, but I don't think we've seen the last of Ronda Rousey wrestling. Definitely not, I don't think. But Who knows? She's had a very eventful Mania to Mania, and she certainly made an impact on the business in some way, shape, or form. So I guess that'll do it for the first ever episode of Mania to Mania. JPQ, thank you very much for joining me, filling in for Kev, tagging him. He tagged you in. You took the bowl. You had a nice little hot tag there. It was a really, really fun. Thank you again. Oh, of course, you're welcome here anytime. But tell the lovely people where we can find you, and if you have anything coming up on no particular angle or anything that you want to promote, this is your chance. The floor is yours.
Thanks, man. First and foremost, I appreciate you coming in. I know it was, short-term circumstances, with Kevin having to get into work and everything. So I appreciate you thinking of me for coming on for the debut of Mania to Mania. No particular angle podcast is a podcast where, I guess we can call it a Stardom podcast on some level, right?
I guess it would be by this point. I mean,
it feels that way, doesn't it?
It's like the most Stardom podcast without saying you're a Stardom podcast. That's not a bad thing.
That's right. I don't like to paint myself into a box, but Stardom is certainly hashtag Watch Stardom is certainly a guilty pleasure of mine. It's one there. Again, sometimes you just want to turn your brain off and you want to enjoy something about wrestling without having to be overly critical. And Stardom does that for me and for a lot of different people because the in-ring work rate keeps you there. The characters are fun. There's a lot of bright colors. And it's simplicity, right? We talked a lot about convoluted storylines, and they keep it simple there, and they execute well. And for those reasons, No Particular Angle has turned into a quasi Stardom Joshi podcast. But at the same time, we still focus on different aspects of the wrestling world, whether that be WWE, GCW, the American independent scene, kind of New Japan Pro Wrestling, but we kind of stick away from UK right now because I don't know much about it. It's a fun little podcast. Every week it's something a little bit different. If you're a fan, if you're interested in Stardom, if the Bushi Road stuff has gotten to you and you're like, wow, I really want to check this out, but I don't know how and I don't know where to start, No Particular Angle can help you through that. We do a batch release, Netflix style, called hashtag Watch Stardom and Chill. Tag League is currently going on. It's going to be ending in the next week or so. At that point, we will be releasing another 6 or 7 episodes, which my friend Josh will be a part of.
I will. I'm going to do it. I promised. JPQ
I know you are.
Months ago, and I live up to my promises. Don't worry. It just takes me a little while.
You're a man of your word, and I know that. So hashtag Watch Stardom and Chill is going to be coming. Other than that, every Wednesday, one half of the hashtag Queen of Pup Connection, you can find a brand new episode of No Particular Angle. As well as you can follow me on Twitter at Big Paws on a Pup, as well as at NPA Podcast, musing about wrestling. And trying to make jokes that typically fall flat.
Same. I can relate to that. Sometimes you think you have a banger of a tweet and you're like, no one cared. Hey, it keeps me sane. Twitter is everyone kind of knows how I am on Twitter at this point. I don't just talk about wrestling. I'll tweet about anything. I don't really care at this point. You're kind of the same. You'll tweet about whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like a nice little being like, I have this thought and I don't want to think about it too much. Let me tweet it because we're just... I don't know, I'm just a silly person. I don't know. Twitter can be a very horrible place, but it can also be a very lovely place if you just let it be. So that's how I kind of judge Twitter. But anyway, I digress. Thank you for joining me again on this debut edition of Mania to Mania. I don't know why I said that like Matt Hardy then. I said that like a broken edition. I don't know why. But we went there. We'll catch you next Friday for a regular edition of Wrestling Reverb, and no doubt Kevin will be back. And we always miss Kevin when he isn't here, but it's nice to have guests on, and it's a good little substitution to have someone like you on, JPQ or Queen or whoever decides to come on, because we might be the former, I guess, Brainbuster alumni at this point, I guess you would call us, but we are still very much active with one another. People ask me that all the time, if I still talk to you guys, and it's like, nothing's really changed. We're just not under like a banner, really. I guess that's how
we kept our same days. That's how committed we are.
We were just in the zone. We're just doing our normal stuff, and we all talk to each other more than ever, I guess you could say. We haven't really stopped that. So to answer anyone that's worried or was asking any of us, we all still talk to one another, and we're all just like the fact that I was just a bit... Kevin just kind of messaged me, was like, hey, I got called into work, I can't do the podcast today, I couldn't record any other time this week. This was my only chunk of time. I was like, yo, I'm just going to see I went through the group chat. I was like, JPQ, he'll come on. And then the beauty of it is that if JPQ said no, there was many other people within that group that I could just been like, hey, are you busy? Would you want to come on? We're all leaning on each other, I guess, in a sense. But we all still talk to one another. It's been, I don't know, smooth? I guess I really haven't changed anything.
Smooth. So. I mean, at the end of the day, it's, you know, it started as a collaborative. It still is a collaborative. More importantly, now more than ever, you know, it's just a bunch of friends who enjoy wrestling, who enjoy bouncing ideas back and forth against one another, and genuinely enjoy each other's company. And that's the beautiful thing about where we are now is, you know, we like each other, we respect each other, we respect each other's opinions, you know, and we enjoy the time that we spend both in the DMs and through podcast collaborations like this. You know, we're fans of each other, and because of that, you know, we're friends with one another. So, you know, BBR might be dead, but at the end of the day, you know, the relationships have only gotten stronger since.
The core of it is not dead. The name is just dead to me.
Correct.
That's how I view it. But yeah, we still all are, and that's how we will continue to be. Like, again, breaking the fourth wall. I'm not really putting this too much out online just because I like to keep some things to myself. But I have made it known that I am going to the States next year, and I intend on meeting many of the people within the group as I can, because it's like, well, it's not like we're just next door to each other every day. I've got my kind of zone and where I'm kind of going. It's all just, now my bank account is very sad, but it's very much worth it. So this time next year, I'll probably be in the States, and we'll probably get to do, if I get to the opportunity to meet you guys, there will be opportunities to do sit-down podcasts together. We're actually in the same room talking to one another, which is just something, the fact that I might be able to watch wrestling with JPQ is something that it's just like, whoa, that's crazy to me, because we are literally on opposite sides of the world.
That's true.
It's crazy. At
least by the end of this podcast, at least we're on the same day again.
Yeah, I mean, it is the 31st over there for you now.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I guess it's Halloween. Oh,
it's Halloween.
Oh, I don't know. I'm Australian. Everyone knows that we don't really celebrate Halloween, which is a shame because it looks fun. It really does. It's something I want to experience one day. We'll get there one day. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mania to Mania. We'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.